The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before the Celestra, a sleek, silver-colored starship gliding smoothly through the universe. Its destination was a remote, unexplored planet on the outer edge of the galaxy, a place where no intelligent life had been discovered. The alien ship carried one occupant, Lyra, a Trilon from the faraway planet of Orcs. She was unlike anything humans had ever seen, a being of luminous skin with delicate features and glowing eyes, her form almost ethereal. Lyra had been traveling in solitude, on a mission to explore new worlds and expand her species' knowledge of the universe. The Trilons had mastered advanced technology and peaceful exploration, seeking only to learn and grow. But the journey had not been kind to Lyra. A powerful cosmic storm, unlike any recorded in her ship's navigational system, had hit her ship without warning. She had tried to steer her vessel away from the storm, but it was too late. The storm had torn through the Celestra like a predator attacking its prey. Lyra's advanced systems fought to keep the ship intact, but the violent winds of the cosmic tempest were too much. The ship spiraled out of control, tumbling helplessly through space, and the last thing Lyra remembered was the shrieking sound of metal and the blinding light as everything around her turned to chaos. When Lyra regained consciousness, the world around her was completely different. The warmth of the ship's interior had vanished, replaced by a bitter, stinging cold that seemed to pierce right through her. She opened her eyes, blinking against the frost that had formed around her, and gasped as she realized her surroundings were no longer the inside of her starship. She was no longer in the smooth metallic safety of the Celestra. The ship had crashed. Lyra struggled to sit up, her body heavy with cold. Her once glowing skin had begun to dim, the chill of the alien planet draining her strength. The icy winds howled outside, carrying the scent of frost and desolation. She shivered violently as her limbs felt like they were made of stone. Despite her advanced physiology, the cold was overwhelming. The ship had landed in what seemed to be a frozen wilderness, a barren landscape of snow and jagged ice stretching for miles in every direction. There was no sign of any life, no animals, no plants, no signs of civilization, just endless white. She stumbled out of the wreckage of the ship, her legs wobbling beneath her. Lyra's mind raced, trying to remember what had happened. The storm, the crash. But her thoughts were muddled, the pain in her head clouding her clarity. She stumbled and fell to her knees in the snow, her breath coming out in shallow gasps. Her body, though resilient, was not prepared for the brutal cold of this alien planet. It wasn't just the freezing temperatures that drained her strength, it was the sheer isolation. She had been alone before, but this felt different. This was something worse than loneliness. This was survival. Desperation crept into her mind. Lyra knew that her people's technology could help her, but her ship's systems were damaged beyond repair. She had no way of contacting anyone, no way of escaping. The planet was hostile to her, and the crash had left her stranded. As the cold gnawed at her, she felt the weight of her situation pressing on her chest. She could feel her energy draining. Slowly, her glowing skin began to lose its brightness, a sign that her body was shutting down in response to the unforgiving cold. And yet there was a flicker of hope. Somewhere, deep within her, Lyra knew that she was not entirely helpless. Her species had been on the edge of greatness, and their resilience was built into their very nature. But even with all her strength, the cold was becoming too much. She fought to stay conscious, but her body was giving up. Her breathing grew slower, her vision blurred, and she finally collapsed, her face falling into the snow, the world around her turning dark. Meanwhile, miles away, Captain Aaron Stark trudged through the icy wilderness of the alien planet. He had been assigned to survey this desolate world, cataloging its resources for future missions. He was an experienced explorer, hardened by years of working in some of the most hostile environments in the galaxy. The mission had seemed straightforward enough, just a routine check on a world that seemed devoid of life. But when his sensors picked up an anomaly, a strange signal emanating from the surface of the planet, he had been drawn to investigate. The signal was faint, but it was enough to lead him to the wreckage of the Celestra. Aaron stood on a ridge, looking down at the crash site below. The ship's twisted remains were barely recognizable, the once mighty vessel reduced to a pile of broken metal and charred debris. His trained eyes searched the wreckage, and that's when he saw her, a figure, half buried in the snow, almost invisible against the icy backdrop. Without hesitation, Aaron made his way down to the wreckage, his heart pounding. When he reached her side, he could hardly believe his eyes. She was beautiful, her skin shimmering faintly beneath the frost, her delicate features almost angelic in the cold, her chest barely rising with each shallow breath. Instinct kicked in. Aaron quickly knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. Her pulse was faint, but there. Without wasting a second, he gathered her into his arms and began making his way back to his shelter, determined to save her from the freezing wilderness. As he moved, he couldn't help but wonder who, or what, she was. But those thoughts would have to wait. Right now, all that mattered was keeping her alive. Aaron Stark carefully carried the alien woman through the snow, her fragile form resting in his arms. Despite the cold biting at his exposed skin, he didn't stop. His years of training as an explorer had taught him how to endure harsh conditions, but carrying someone in these temperatures was no small feat. Every step he took felt heavier, but he kept going, focusing on one thing: survival. The frozen wilderness stretched endlessly around him, the landscape a vast, white sea of snow and ice. There were no landmarks, no signs of life, only the harsh wind that howled across the land. He didn't know how long it would take to reach his shelter, but he couldn't afford to waste any time. The alien woman, whoever she was, needed help, and she needed it fast. As he moved through the desolate world, his thoughts raced. What had happened to her? Who was she? The first thing that struck him was her appearance. She looked almost otherworldly, her skin faintly glowing in the darkness of the frozen landscape. Her features were delicate and elegant, but there was a sense of power to her too. Power that had been diminished by the cold, like a light struggling to remain bright in a storm. He couldn't stop thinking about how fragile she seemed, her soft breathing the only sign that she was still alive. He had no idea what kind of alien species she came from, but he was determined to keep her alive. His shelter wasn't far away now. He pushed himself harder, fighting against the fatigue in his limbs, the weight of the cold pressing in on him. When he finally reached the small shelter he had set up in this hostile environment, he didn't hesitate. He gently laid her down on the makeshift bed he had prepared, keeping her warm with layers of thermal blankets. His shelter wasn't much, just a basic survival hut, but it had the essentials: heat, food, and water. And right now, that was all they needed. Aaron immediately went to work, checking her vitals. Her skin was still cold, but her pulse was stronger. That was a good sign. He had to act quickly, though. He knew that the cold could be deadly if left unchecked, and she had been exposed for too long. He started a fire in the small stove he had set up, hoping to warm the air and prevent any further damage to her body. As the fire crackled and warmth began to fill the shelter, Aaron looked down at her again. Her beauty was undeniable. There was something mesmerizing about her, something that made him feel like he was in the presence of something far beyond anything he had ever encountered. Her glowing skin, the way her long hair seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. It was all so strange, yet so captivating. But Aaron knew he couldn't get lost in her appearance. He had a job to do, and that was to keep her alive. For hours, he worked tirelessly, checking her temperature, adjusting the blankets, and making sure she stayed warm. Slowly, he began to notice small signs of improvement. Her breathing became deeper, less labored. The color in her skin started to return, her once dim glow flickering back to life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stirred. Aaron was sitting on a nearby chair, his eyes never leaving her as she shifted slightly. Her eyelids fluttered, and she let out a small gasp. Slowly, her eyes opened, revealing the strange glow that Aaron had first noticed when he found her. He wasn't sure if it was an effect of the cold or a natural feature, but there was no mistaking it. She was different. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice weak and shaky, but still unmistakably graceful. Aaron smiled, though it was small. "You're safe. You're in my shelter. I found you in the snow." The alien woman blinked, her eyes scanning the room. She seemed confused, her gaze shifting from Aaron to the walls of the shelter. Slowly, she sat up, wincing slightly as she moved. The cold had clearly taken its toll, but she was alive. "I remember the crash," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The storm, it was too much." Aaron nodded, his expression softening. "The storm, yeah, it was a nasty one. But you're here now, and that's what matters. I'm just glad I found you before it was too late." The woman looked at him, her glowing eyes searching his face. There was a look of gratitude in them, but also something else, something like wonder. She seemed to be studying him, as if trying to understand who this human was and why he had come to her rescue. "You're human," she said softly, as if the word itself held a weight of significance. "Yes," Aaron replied. "I'm from Earth. I'm an explorer, part of a mission to chart this planet. I wasn't expecting to find someone like you." The woman's lips curved slightly, as if trying to smile. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice regaining some strength. "I come from the planet Voris. We are explorers too, like you. But I was alone." Aaron's eyes widened slightly. Voris. He had never heard of it. But then again, he wasn't an expert on alien worlds. "Voris," he repeated, the name unfamiliar but intriguing. "You're an explorer too. What happened to your ship?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze lowering for a moment. "We were forced to flee. Our planet was destroyed, attacked by forces we could not stop." Her voice faltered for a moment, and Aaron could sense the weight of her words. "I was alone on the ship when the storm hit." Aaron sat down beside her, his mind racing. She was a refugee, a survivor of something far worse than a simple crash. And now she was here, in this cold, desolate place, with him. There was a lot he didn't know yet, but one thing was clear. They both had stories to tell, and they both needed each other if they were going to survive. "You're not alone now," Aaron said, offering her a reassuring smile. "I'm here." Lyra met his gaze, her eyes glowing softly once more, and for the first time since the crash, she felt a small sense of hope. Lyra's recovery was slow but steady. As the days passed in the small shelter, she began to regain her strength, though the memories of the crash still haunted her. The storm, the sudden loss of her home, the chaos of her ship falling apart. It all felt like a nightmare she couldn't escape. But every day, as she rested and allowed the warmth of the shelter to heal her body, she also began to adjust to her new reality. She was no longer on Voris, no longer in the safety of her people. She was alone, except for Aaron. The human explorer had been nothing but kind to her, helping her when she was at her weakest. He gave her food, water, and warmth, and slowly he earned her trust. He had taught her how to use the basic survival equipment he carried, even showing her how to start a fire when the shelter's heating system failed. There were still many things she didn't understand about him and his world, but one thing was clear: he was someone she could rely on. Aaron, for his part, had tried his best to make Lyra feel comfortable. He had spent countless hours checking on her, ensuring she was staying warm, and even bringing her books and maps to pass the time. He was a man of few words, but there was something about him that made Lyra feel safe. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a strange pull toward him. In a way, she had always been alone, even on Voris. But now, in the frozen wilderness of this unknown world, she had someone beside her, someone who wasn't afraid to help, to protect her. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow, Aaron brought a small bundle of supplies into the shelter. He had been out scouting again, checking for any signs of danger and looking for more resources. The supply mission had been uneventful, but it gave him time to think. He had been thinking about Lyra a lot lately, about the way her glowing skin seemed to pulse in the dim light, the way her eyes looked at him with gratitude and something else, something that felt almost like curiosity. He walked over to her, who was sitting by the fire, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Her long silver hair framed her face, and the glow of the fire seemed to highlight her ethereal beauty. She had recovered much since the crash, but she still wasn't fully herself. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to do now. She had no ship, no home, no people. And even though Aaron had been kind, she knew he wasn't from her world. He was a human, from a planet called Earth, far, far away from Voris. "How are you feeling today?" Aaron asked, breaking the silence as he set the supplies down. Lyra turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a soft smile. "Better," she replied. "Much better. Thank you for all that you've done." She paused, her gaze thoughtful. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Aaron gave a small nod. "I just did what anyone would do. You needed help." Lyra's eyes softened. Maybe, but not everyone would have stopped to help an alien. Most humans would have turned away. Aaron sat down across from her, his brow furrowing slightly. "I don't think like that. I've seen a lot of things out here, and I've learned that you can't just leave someone to die, no matter who they are or where they come from." Lyra tilted her head, studying him for a moment. She couldn't quite place why, but she felt like there was something different about Aaron, something that went beyond his kindness. "You're different," she said quietly. Aaron chuckled, though it was a soft, tired sound. "I've heard that before." Lyra's lips curled into a small smile, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something akin to hope. She looked out the small window of the shelter, at the endless snow-covered landscape stretching before her. The world outside was cold, unforgiving, and alien to her, but in this small space, there was warmth. There was safety, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely alone. After a moment, Aaron stood up and began unpacking the supplies he had brought back. "I found some more food and water, but there's something else I came across." He reached into his pack and pulled out a small device, no larger than a palm. "I found a signal, something faint, but it's definitely there. I'm not sure what it is, but it could be from another ship or a station. We might not be the only ones on this planet." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. A signal? Could it be someone from my people? Aaron studied the device, his brow furrowing. "I'm not sure, but we can check it out. It could be a lead." Lyra's mind raced. If it was a signal from her people, it could mean hope. It could mean she wasn't the only one who had survived. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a trap? What if it was more danger? She didn't know, but the thought of finding some trace of her people made her heart ache with longing. She couldn't help it. The idea of being reunited with someone from her home, after everything she had lost, felt like a lifeline she wasn't sure she could resist. "I want to go with you," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I have to know." Aaron looked at her, studying her face carefully. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the need for connection, for answers. "Are you sure? It could be dangerous out there." Lyra nodded. "I have to know. If there's a chance, even a small one, that I can find my people, I have to take it." Aaron hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right, we'll go together." As he looked into her glowing eyes, something stirred inside him. He had been alone on this planet for so long, only surviving from day to day. But now, with Lyra by his side, there was something more, something worth fighting for. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. They both stood in silence, the weight of the unknown hanging in the air, but for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt entirely alone. The following morning, The air inside the shelter was filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. Lyra had bundled herself up in the warmest layers she could find, her eyes focused on the small signal device Aaron had found the day before. The idea of finding someone, anyone from her people, filled her with a mix of hope and nervous excitement. She had been alone for so long, and the thought of reconnecting with anyone who shared her past was almost too much to grasp. Aaron, too, seemed focused as he checked over his survival gear one last time. He knew the journey ahead would be dangerous. The terrain outside the shelter was harsh and unforgiving, and the mysterious signal might be a trap or lead to more danger. But he had seen the fire in Lyra's eyes when she spoke of finding her people. He wasn't about to let her go alone. "Ready?" Aaron asked, his voice steady but tinged with caution. Lyra looked at him, her glowing eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and hope. "Yes," she replied firmly. "I have to know. We can't waste any time." Aaron nodded and adjusted his pack, which was filled with supplies for the journey. "We'll take it slow. We don't know what we'll find out there, but we'll make sure we're prepared." Lyra appreciated his careful approach. For someone who was not from her world, Aaron had quickly adapted to the harshness of this planet. He knew how to survive in its freezing wilderness, how to navigate its vast white expanses. And now he was offering that knowledge to her. The two of them set out from the shelter early in the morning, their breath visible in the frosty air. The wind howled across the land, sending snowflakes swirling in the air. The frozen terrain stretched out before them, the white snow blending seamlessly with the icy sky above. It was a quiet, eerie place where the sound of their footsteps was muffled by the thick blanket of snow. As they walked, Lyra tried to gather her thoughts. She had left everything behind. The planet Voris, her people, her home. She had been an explorer, just like Aaron, but the universe had a way of turning even the most peaceful journeys into something far darker. The thought of what had happened to her world haunted her, but she pushed it aside. If there was a chance, even a small one, to find survivors, she couldn't let fear hold her back. Aaron glanced over at her as they walked. He could see the determination in her eyes, but he also noticed the sadness that lingered beneath the surface. He had only known her for a short time, but it was clear that Lyra had lost something important, maybe everything. She didn't talk much about her past, but Aaron could sense the weight she carried. He had no idea what it felt like to lose an entire world, but he understood loneliness. He had spent months on this planet by himself, and though it was different, the isolation was familiar. "You okay?" Aaron asked after a long silence, breaking the quiet between them. Lyra glanced at him and nodded. "I'm fine. Just thinking." Aaron gave a small smile. It's hard to stop thinking when there's nothing but snow in every direction. Lyra chuckled softly, the sound a rare one. "It is," she agreed. "But this place, it's beautiful in its own way. It's just so empty." "Yeah," Aaron said, looking around at the vast, snowy plains. "It's hard to imagine anyone living here, but I'm sure you're right. If there's anyone left, we'll find them." Lyra didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned her attention to the device that was now in her hand. It was small, no bigger than a communication unit, with a faint light blinking on its surface. The signal was weak, but it was enough to give them direction. She kept her grip tight on it, as though holding it would somehow bring her closer to answers. As the hours passed, the cold began to wear on them both. The terrain was rough, with snowdrifts that slowed their progress. The wind seemed to pick up as they moved forward, the biting chill cutting through their clothing. Still, they pushed on, knowing that they couldn't afford to stop for long. Lyra's stamina had improved since the crash, but the harsh environment was still a challenge. They reached a ridge later that afternoon, and from there they could see something unusual in the distance, a faint, flickering light, just barely visible against the white backdrop of the snow. The signal was growing stronger, and Lyra's heart raced at the sight. "There it is," she said, her voice filled with hope. "It's real." We're getting closer. Aaron squinted against the wind, looking in the direction Lyra was pointing. I see it. Let's move quickly, but carefully. We don't know what it is yet. They began the descent down the ridge, each step cautious as they made their way toward the mysterious light. The closer they got, the more real it became. There was something out there, something beyond just the barren wilderness they had crossed. As they approached, the light grew brighter, and soon they were standing before what appeared to be an old outpost, half buried in snow. The structure was primitive, with jagged metal walls that seemed to have been built to withstand the harsh elements. It was small, but it was definitely a man-made structure, and it was clearly not a part of Aaron's original mission. Lyra's pulse quickened. What is this place? Aaron moved closer, his hand hovering over his weapon just in case. I don't know, but it's not on any of my maps. We'll need to be cautious. They approached the entrance, which was partially covered by a mound of snow. The door was rusted, but it was still intact. Aaron motioned for Lyra to stand back before he pulled open the door with a creak. Inside, the air was stale and cold, but there was something alive about the place. The dim light flickered from a small generator, casting long shadows along the walls. I've never seen anything like this before, Aaron muttered, stepping inside cautiously. Lyra followed, her heart pounding as she took in the sight of the small room. It was filled with old equipment, some of it unfamiliar, some of it clearly human in design. But there were other things too. Alien technology, perhaps, or signs of something else. Something unfamiliar. The mystery of this place was just beginning to unfold, and Lyra couldn't help but wonder if this would lead to answers or more questions. But there was one thing she knew for sure. The journey had only just begun. The inside of the outpost was unlike anything Lyra had expected. The air was thick with the smell of rust and old machinery, and the dim light flickered uncertainly, casting strange shadows across the walls. Every step they took disturbed the silence, and Lyra could feel her heart racing in anticipation. What had happened here? Why was this place abandoned? And most importantly, who had left the signal? Aaron motioned for her to stay close as he examined the room. His eyes scanned the walls, which were lined with unfamiliar symbols and strange devices. Some of them were clearly human-made, but others, Lyra couldn't tell if they belonged to humans or if they were from another world altogether. The technology in this place was a puzzle, a mix of the old and the unknown. Aaron moved toward a console that was still active, its screen flickering weakly. This might give us some answers, he muttered. He tapped a few buttons, and the screen buzzed to life, showing a series of images that Lyra couldn't quite make sense of. Some were maps. Others seemed like schematics for different machines, and in the corner of the screen there was a flashing warning symbol. "What is this?" Lyra asked, stepping closer. Aaron glanced at her. "Not sure yet, but it looks like some sort of data log. This place might have been a research station or a military outpost. It's possible whoever left the signal was part of a larger group." Lyra's heart skipped a beat at the thought. A larger group. The idea of more survivors filled her with hope, but it also brought a new wave of fear. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face anyone else yet, not after everything she had lost. Still, the possibility that someone from her world might be here was too tempting to ignore. The console beeped suddenly, and a new screen appeared. This one was showing a map of the area, with a blinking red dot near the center. Lyra stared at it, her mind racing. The dot was moving, slowly, as though it were following them. "Looks like something, or someone, is tracking us," Aaron said, his voice low. "We need to move quickly." Lyra's pulse quickened. "What does that mean? Who else is out there?" "I don't know," Aaron replied, his face hardening with determination. "But we can't stay here long. We need to follow that signal to its source. If it's a distress call, it could mean help is on the way." Without another word, Aaron turned and made his way toward the exit. Lyra followed closely behind, her thoughts in turmoil. Who could be tracking them? And why? As they stepped outside, the biting cold hit them instantly. The wind howled, whipping around their faces, but neither of them slowed their pace. They had a mission now: find the source of the signal and uncover the truth behind the mysterious outpost. The landscape before them was as harsh and unforgiving as ever, but Lyra could feel a sense of urgency building inside her. The signal had to be close, and whatever it wasn't just a random transmission. It was leading them somewhere, toward something. But whether it was a trap or a lifeline, she couldn't say. They moved quickly, keeping their eyes on the horizon, and their senses alert. Every so often, Lyra would glance at the signal device, watching as the dot on the screen moved ever closer to their location. It was almost like it was pulling them in, guiding them through the frozen wilderness. Hours passed as they trudged through the snow. The cold was unbearable, and Lyra could feel the exhaustion starting to settle in. Her muscles ached, her breath came in ragged gasps. But she couldn't stop. Not now. She had come too far, and there was something in her that refused to give up. Aaron, too, seemed to push past his limits. The exhaustion was visible on his face, but his focus never wavered. They both understood the stakes. If there was even the smallest chance that they could find others, survivors from Lyra's world, or from somewhere else, they had to take it. The landscape began to change the further they went. The snow-covered plains gave way to jagged rock formations, towering mountains that loomed in the distance. The wind became fiercer, and the cold more biting, but the signal grew stronger. They were getting closer. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of walking, they reached the base of one of the towering cliffs. The signal was now so strong that it was almost impossible to ignore. Lyra felt a surge of excitement, but it was mixed with fear. What were they about to find? What if this wasn't a rescue mission, but something much more dangerous? Aaron glanced at her, his expression serious. "Stay close," he said quietly. "We don't know what's waiting for us." Lyra nodded, her throat tight. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Together, they approached the base of the cliff, looking for any sign of an entrance, any clue that would explain the source of the signal. As they walked along the rocky ground, Aaron's eyes suddenly locked onto something, a faint glow coming from a narrow crack in the cliff face. He motioned for Lyra to stay back, then moved toward it cautiously. "It's here," Aaron whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding. The crack in the cliff widened just enough to reveal a dark passage leading into the rock. The glow was coming from inside, faint but unmistakable. Without a word, Aaron stepped into the opening, and Lyra followed closely behind. They moved carefully, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. The glow ahead of them grew stronger as they went deeper into the cave-like passage. At the end of the tunnel, they found a large chamber. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that pulsed softly in the dim light. At the center of the room, there was a large metallic structure, a towering machine with wires and cables crisscrossing its surface. The signal was coming from this machine. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. This was it. Whatever this place was, whatever had brought them here, it was connected to this strange device. She could feel her heart racing as she stepped closer to it, her mind whirling with possibilities. But as she reached out to touch it, a sudden sound broke the silence, a low, rumbling hum that seemed to come from deep within the machine. Aaron's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Wait," he warned, his voice tense. Something was awakening, and they were right in the middle of it. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't just the machine that was making the noise. It felt as if the entire chamber was alive. Lyra could feel it deep in her bones, a strange energy that seemed to pulse with every beat of her heart. The air around them felt charged, almost electric, and she instinctively took a step back. Her eyes flickered to Aaron, who stood motionless, his face tense with uncertainty. "What's happening?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Aaron didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the machine at the center of the room, his fingers tightening around the weapon he carried. He was trying to make sense of what they were witnessing, but nothing about this situation made sense. He had never seen anything like it before. No signal, no machine, nothing that could explain what was unfolding before them. The humming sound intensified, and suddenly, the glowing symbols on the walls flared to life. They shifted and moved, like an ancient language coming to life. The light from the symbols bathed the room in an eerie, shifting glow. It was mesmerizing, but also terrifying. Lyra's skin prickled, and her heart began to race again. She could sense something was about to happen, something they weren't prepared for. Aaron stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the machine. Whatever this is, it's not human. This technology is beyond anything I've ever seen. Lyra took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. But could it be connected to my people? She wanted to believe that this could be the key to finding her home, but the fear gnawing at her was hard to ignore. I don't know, Aaron replied, his voice tight. But whatever it is, it's important. As if in response to his words, the machine shifted. A low, rumbling sound filled the chamber as parts of it began to move. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as metal panels slid open, revealing a dark space inside. There was something inside the machine, something that seemed to be waking up. The air seemed to crackle, and Lyra felt her heart rate spike. Aaron, we need to leave. This feels wrong. Aaron glanced at her, his expression torn. He knew that they had come too far to turn back now. But the feeling in the air was undeniable. Something was coming to life, and it wasn't friendly. Before Aaron could respond, a flash of light erupted from the center of the machine. Lyra flinched, shielding her eyes from the sudden brilliance. The glow filled the entire chamber, blinding her for a moment. When the light finally dimmed, the room was still and silent once more. But then something in the shadows shifted. A figure stepped forward, emerging from the depths of the machine. It was humanoid, tall and slender, but it was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Its skin was smooth and metallic, shimmering with a strange iridescence that caught the dim light of the room. The creature's eyes glowed a faint blue, as though it had no need for a physical source of light. Its features were angular, almost robotic, but there was something undeniably alive about it. Lyra froze, her pulse racing. This was not what she had expected. This wasn't a person. This wasn't anything she had ever encountered. The figure's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, she thought it might speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, it tilted its head as if studying her, its expression unreadable. "What is it?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Aaron answered, his hand hovering near his weapon. "But we need to be careful." The figure remained motionless, its eyes still locked on Lyra. There was no sign of hostility, but its presence felt like a warning. Lyra took a cautious step back, her eyes darting to the machine that had released it. There had to be some explanation for this, some purpose behind it all. But right now, she was unsure if she wanted to find out. Then the figure spoke, not in words, but through a voice that echoed inside Lyra's mind. It was a strange, disembodied voice, deep and mechanical, yet somehow familiar. "You are not alone." Lyra's heart skipped a beat at the voice in her mind. She glanced at Aaron, but his expression was just as confused as hers. "Did you hear that?" she thought, afraid to speak the words aloud. Aaron nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "I heard it. But how?" The figure's eyes seemed to flicker, as if responding to their unspoken thoughts. It took a step forward, its movements fluid and graceful despite its mechanical appearance. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping noticeably as the figure drew closer. "I am a guardian." The voice echoed again, this time clearer. "This place is a relic, a remnant of the past. You seek answers. I will help you, but you must listen carefully." Lyra's mind raced as she tried to process the words. A guardian, a remnant of the past. What was this being, and what did it want with them? Before she could ask anything, the figure extended a hand toward her. The air around its arm seemed to shimmer with energy, a soft, glowing aura surrounding it. Lyra hesitated, but something in her, an instinct, a gut feeling, told her that this being was not her enemy. Not yet, anyway. She slowly reached out, her fingers brushing against the figure's hand. The moment their hands touched, a surge of information flooded her mind, visions, memories, and sensations, too much for her to comprehend all at once. She saw glimpses of other worlds, of civilizations long lost, and of a war that had spread across the stars. She saw the destruction of her home planet, Voris, and the despair that had followed. But among the chaos, she saw hope, a beacon of light, a signal that had traveled across the stars to reach her. The Guardian was part of this, part of a larger plan, one that stretched back millennia. The figure withdrew its hand, and the visions faded. Lyra gasped, staggering backward as the flood of information left her disoriented. "The past," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's all connected." The Guardian's glowing eyes fixed on her again, and its voice spoke once more, clear and strong. "You have a choice. Follow the path laid before you, or return to the unknown. But know this, the future of your people depends on your next move." The chamber was silent once more, the weight of the decision hanging heavily in the air. Lyra's heart raced. What was the right choice? What would be the consequences of this strange encounter? She didn't know, but the path ahead was now clear. She had to keep moving forward, no matter the risks. The future of her people was in her hands. Lyra stood still, her mind swirling with the weight of the Guardian's words. The chamber, once quiet, now felt charged with a sense of urgency. She could feel the future pressing on her shoulders, heavy and uncertain. The path ahead was shrouded in mystery, and every step she took would shape the fate of her people, her home. But where was she supposed to go? What was she supposed to do? The Guardian's presence loomed over her, its eyes still glowing softly, waiting for her to make her decision. The faint hum of the machine behind them seemed to echo through the room, adding to the tension. I don't know what to do," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The images from the Guardian's vision had been overwhelming, too much to process in such a short time. The destruction of her world, the long-lost civilizations, the war that had ravaged the stars. It was all a blur of pain and loss. But then, amid the chaos, there had been a flicker of hope, the beacon of light, the signal that had guided her here. It was all connected, and now she was standing at the crossroads. The Guardian's voice echoed in her mind again, calm and patient. "You already know what you must do. The future of your people depends on the choices you make now. It is not a question of what you can do, but what you are willing to sacrifice." Sacrifice. The word lingered in the air, as though the very idea of it was as heavy as the stars themselves. Lyra's eyes darted to Aaron, who was standing nearby, watching her with a mix of concern and determination. He had been with her every step of the way, through the crash, the wilderness, the cold. But this was different. They were no longer just survivors. They were part of something much larger, a puzzle that needed to be solved, a future that needed to be shaped. "Lyra." Aaron's voice was low, filled with understanding. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you. You don't have to do this alone." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. He had been her strength when she had none. He had kept her grounded when the weight of the universe had threatened to crush her. But now, as much as she wanted to hold on to him, she knew that the choice she faced was hers alone, and it was a choice that would determine everything. The Guardian, sensing her inner turmoil, spoke once more. "There is no turning back once you make this decision. The knowledge and power you seek will come at a cost, but the future is waiting for you to embrace it. Will you walk the path of hope, or will you turn away and let your people's fate remain uncertain?" Lyra's chest tightened as the words sank in. The future of her people. The future of Voris. Could she truly bring them back from the ashes? Could she help them rise from the ruin and despair that had consumed them? She didn't have all the answers, and she couldn't do it alone. But she had a chance that hadn't existed before. She turned toward Aaron, her voice steady, but filled with determination. I have to do this. For them. For my people. Aaron nodded, a sense of resolve in his eyes. Then let's go. We'll face whatever comes next together. The Guardian observed their exchange, a flicker of approval in its glowing eyes. You have made your choice. Prepare yourself, for what lies ahead will test you both in ways you cannot yet imagine. With those words, the figure stepped back, allowing them space to move. Lyra felt a wave of energy course through the room, and she knew that the time had come. The machine in the center of the chamber hummed again, its glowing symbols pulsating faster now. The air crackled with power as the room seemed to come alive with a force that was beyond anything she could comprehend. Lyra took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She stepped forward, toward the machine, toward the future. As she approached it, the machine's energy began to surround her, filling her with warmth and light. The air shimmered around her as though time itself was bending. The process had begun. Suddenly, she felt a sharp, tingling sensation throughout her body. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, almost as if the very essence of her being was being reshaped, remade. The machine's energy connected with her, and Lyra gasped as visions flooded her mind once again. This time, they were clearer, sharper. She saw the stars themselves, vast and endless, and beyond them, a network of interwoven lights, like a cosmic web connecting every corner of the universe. She saw her people, her ancestors, and their legacy. The knowledge, the technology they had left behind, the secrets of the stars. They were all within her reach. It was overwhelming, but she knew what she had to do. The machine's energy surged, and suddenly, the visions stopped. Lyra blinked, disoriented, as the chamber fell silent once more. The light around her faded, leaving her standing in the center of the room, breathless, but filled with a newfound understanding. She had seen what lay ahead, the path that her people could take, and it was within her power to guide them. The Guardian's voice echoed once more, this time gentle, and filled with quiet pride. You are ready. The choice you have made will lead to a new beginning. The future is yours to shape. Lyra looked around, and then at Aaron. The weight of the decision still pressed on her shoulders, but now there was a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose. She had found the path forward, and she knew that whatever challenges awaited, she would face them with strength and resolve. Together, with Aaron by her side, she would rebuild her world. Together, they would find the hope that had been lost and build a future for all who had suffered. The journey had not ended. It was only just beginning. Lyra took a final breath, and with her heart full of determination, she stepped out into the unknown, ready to embrace the future she had chosen.